So we're learning, in just a second, Likkutei Torah, Likkutei Sichot, Volume 2, Parshas Harei. We're in Section 5, page 82 in the Hebrew. Yes, so you were saying, the Torah Or, in the Alter Rebbe's compendium, anthology of Maimarim, מדובר על רבי חנינא בן תרדיון שעשה שני דברים, מעשה אחד השייך לקו החסד, מעשה שני השייך לקו הגבורה. So what did he do? You'll have to excuse me for a moment. Read inside a little. ובזה הובן מהסדר רבי קיסמא עם רבי חנינא בן תרדיון. Rabbi Chanina ben Taradion was caught for teaching Torah by the Romans. He was placed in a prison. And with him in the prison was Rabbi Yosei ben Kisma. And he said to him, Tameh anim lo yisrefu otcha. I would be surprised if you won't be burnt, which is exactly what happened to him in the end. As he was burnt, and they took a Torah scroll. They wrapped him up in the Torah scroll, and then that they used as the burning material. Ve'eshivo, and he answered him, Min hashamayim irachmu. And Rabbi Chanina ben Taradion said to Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, from heaven they will have compassion on me. Ve'amar lo, so Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma says, Ani mar lecha divrei tam, v'ata omer li divrei heaven. He says, I'm giving you sound advice, and you're answering me with Luftgeschäft, stuff that doesn't make any sense. ואמר לו רבי חנינא, מה אני לחיי העולם הבא? ואמר לי, כלום מעשה. So Rabbi Chanina said, but the question isn't that. The question is, will I be ending up in the world to come or not? What the non-Jews call the afterlife. But he didn't really mean the afterlife in that sense. In any case. So he asked him, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma asked him, Klum ma'aseh bal yadcha. Is there any kind of special act, special action that you did that was especially difficult? Ve'eshivo ma'ot purim v'chilaktim la'aniyim. Ad kan. So he answered that I was a gabai tzedakah, meaning that I had my duty was to collect for the poor, and Ma'ot Purim came into my hands, and I gave them to the poor.
Yeah, they got mixed up with his own money.
With his own money. Well, not exactly with his own money, with other money that he had collected, and he gave everything to the poor. Or with his own money, it could be that was his, depending on. And that's the Maisa. And that's supposed to be the proof, this way or that, of whether he has a portion in the world to come or not. So says the Alter Rebbe, and the point, the whole question is hard to understand. What do you mean? This guy is going now to be executed for teaching Torah, and he's asking questions about whether he has a portion in the world to come. Of course he has a portion. What's the question? לא היה לו עדיין חלק לעולם הבא. He doesn't have a portion in the world to come. וגם מה שאל רבי יוסי, כלום מעשה בא לידך, מהו תשובה על שאלתו? So what kind of question was this by Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma? So העניין שהיה רבי חנין בן תרדיון מסופק בעצמו עניין מסירת נפשו בשביל לעסק התורה, אם הוא באמיתות לשם שמיים בלבד, אף שהיה צדיק מופלג ולומד לשמה באמת, מכל מקום, לפי שיש בני אדם שמצד טבעו ומסגור מידותיו להמשיך חשק ותשוקת כל לבבו אל לימוד החוכמות, ולהיות תמיד מחשבתו וליבו ושכלו דבוק בהן. והראיה מהפילוסופים ומהאומות הקדמונים שהיו שרים גדולים, לא יחסר להם כל מדעני עולם. היו עוזבים את כל תענוגים, ועוסקים בכל לבבם את תשוקת נפשם בלימוד החוכמות, כל יום ולילה, ואין הרשתו פנויה. He says, the fact that a person is so ingrained in learning Torah is not proof of anything. Because there are people who by their nature nature are like that. They used to call them melancholy. This person had Mara Shchora who had melancholy, so they were drawn to learning. And he gives an example. There were non-Jews, philosophers he calls them, that were very, very wealthy. They had everything they could possibly want, and they didn't use the money in order to pursue bodily pleasures, but rather they were completely ingrained by studying philosophy. Everything they could get their hands on, all day and night they would just study. So that shows that it could be that a person is ingrained in Torah. He's completely committed to learning, not because he's interested in God. It's just that he has melancholy, he has this nature, and the nature pushes him to always pursue intellectual pursuits. So that doesn't prove anything. So that's why he had a question. So he says, it could be that my whole pursuit, because what was he being executed for? For teaching Torah in public, when the Romans had forbidden it. So that doesn't mean anything, he says. All it says is that I have this unquenchable thirst for knowledge. And you know that a person who is seeking knowledge, a lot of times, they feel that without teaching others, the knowledge is not complete. And because that's the real test of whether you've integrated and understood what you've been studying or not, whether you can transmit it to someone else. So that was his question. So Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, what he asked him was there a special action that came to you? He goes on and on here with analyzing this. לפיכך רבי חנניה בן תרדיון היה ירא שמא גם מצד טבעו גופני גורם לו מסירות נפשו בעד החוכמה, אף שבוודאי אינו אלא מעט מזר במקום כהן זה לשם לבדו, שהיה מרבי יוסי איך הוא משיג בו. So he asked Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, so how do I tell the difference? How do I know that I've really spent my life dedicating myself to something that was not natural, that didn't come naturally to me, that I actually exerted effort in my life? So he said to him, it can only be understood by looking at actions that you've done. פירוש, על כל ניסיון שהחילוק בו שאם הוא מצד טבע הגוף, אף שיחשוב חשק נפלא, כל פעמים לא יגיע למסירות נפש. ואמר לו, שמעות פורים וכולי, שהוא עניין פיזור ממון, שזהו אות ומופת שאין במסירות נפש שלו, אפילו שורש המרה, שמידת המרה השואה גורמת מידת הקמצנות. So he says here, the fact that you took these alms that were collected for Purim, and you did give them to the poor, whereas you could have been in a position where you would have found a reason not to give it, that proves that you don't have marash choah. That proves that you don't have melancholy. How does it prove that you don't have melancholy? Because somebody who has melancholy is also very stringy, and he won't give away anything that he has if he doesn't have to. And so the fact that you acted with the opposite, you gave an overflowing abundance, and you easily got rid of what you could have thought was yours. So that proves that it's not melancholy. So what's the idea here? That if a person is rectified, it could be that he has melancholy, but what he's showing him is that even if you have melancholy, what you have is balanced by the opposite side. And that can only come from Mesirut Nefesh. That balancing is, again, it could be that what you've done with some of the Torah that you've learned was because of your nature, but it's not only your nature, because in order to come to this balance between two opposite character traits, you have to exercise Mesirut Nefesh. You have to exercise some going outside of your comfort zone. And you can't stay the way you are. Okay, so that's the example he brings here in the Sichot. So now he says, שעשה שני דברים, מעשה אחד השייך לקו החסד, מעשה שני השייך לקו הגבורה. So the fact that he had gvura, that's his learning Torah. And it's interesting that he calls it here, I think he doesn't go on later with another act. He's talking about the fact that he was willing to sacrifice himself to teach in public. So that was the one act. And the other act was that he was willing to give money that was questionably his and willing to happily give it to others, to the poor. So he says these two actions, one is from the side of chesed, one is loving kindness, that's the giving, okay? That's being the opposite of stingy. And to have this boldness to teach Torah, even though it was punishable by death, that was from the left side, from the side of gvura, from the side of might. And he performed both of them equally, mitoch kach, meaning that he didn't have any questions about either. He did both of them without any kind of opposition from the other side. Meaning he didn't teach Torah and at the same time say, wait a minute, maybe I should take care of myself more. No, he completely went on a limb, and that's why he was caught. And the same thing with the Maos Purim, with the tzedakah that he had, that he didn't keep some of it. He could have said, maybe it's like this, maybe it's like that. That would show that these are natural traits, that he hasn't worked on himself. But the fact that he could do both without any kind of inner turmoil, inner opposition, that shows that he's risen from his natural state to a cerebral state, to a state that can only come through Mesiras Nefesh. It can only come through self-sacrifice. Meaning the person has to sacrifice his natural tendencies. He has to go against them hard enough to the point where he controls them fully. And that's really what he showed. That's what he demonstrated with these two opposite actions. מתוך כך יובן שעשה זאת לא מחמת טיבו, כי אם כתוצאה מעבודתו. So he didn't do these actions out of his nature, but because of his service, because of his toil. שכן אילו היה זה מחמת הטבע, לא היה מסוגל לעשות שני הדברים בחיוניות שווה. He could, if it really was that this was just acting on his nature, he could not have done both of them with the same ease. One of them would have been more difficult. כפי שנאמר בספרי, שמידות האהבה ויראה הן מידות הופכיות ואינן מסוגלות להופיע יחד. As the Sifrei says, the Midrash Halacha, that love and fear cannot come together because they are opposites. ורק בעבודת השם אפשרית שתי המידות יחד. Only when you're serving Hashem or through service of God is it possible to hold on to both sides at the same time. To have both sides, the left and right side, acts of chesed, acts of loving kindness, and acts of might. This is the meaning of what the end of the Akedah, when after Avram had bound Isaac, Hashem says to him, now I know that you are God-fearing. What was Avram until now? Until now he was known as Avraham Avi, the one who loves God. Now he's suddenly known as one who fears God. All the previous tests that God had given him in his life were tests that exercised his natural side, which was his right side, his side of loving kindness. They were tests that he could surmount because of his supernatural loving kindness. So in the end, it was not even possible for Avraham to know whether he was just following the way he had been created. This is what God gave him. These are the gifts that God gave him. Or whether his conduct was the product of his service, of his toil. And that's something that every person has to ask himself. Am I just being who God made me, and then I'm not worthy of anything because I'm like a chicken? A chicken does exactly what a chicken is created to do. And I have a brain, and I have character traits, and this and that, and I just do what I'm supposed to do. I haven't done anything to warrant any kind of reward. I haven't done anything to merit value in my life. I've just followed what my instincts are. I've only capitalized on what God gave me anyway. כשהניסיון זה הביא את יצחק לעקדה, שרצה לבצע בו את אשר רצה, והרי דבר כזה שייך לקו הגבורה, אז אתה ידעתי כי אלוקים אתה. אז הוא ראה גם ביחד הניסיונות הקודמים שמקורם בעבודה. So he says, the moment that this 10th and final test came, so here we see that even though Avram's natural state was loving kindness, he acted with tremendous might. He was able to bind his son up to Shechtim. So the willingness to be able to do that is so contrary to loving kindness, and he did it with the same resolve with which he had done all the previous tests. Yeah, it says Vayishkem Avram b'boker, and it also says Vayishkem Avram by Sodom. Same thing. So when he came to protect people, and when he came to supposedly murder his son because God had commanded it, which he didn't, but that was a different problem. So he did it with the same energy, with the same excitement. That could only come from a person who has worked on himself. That's called avoda. So section 6. This is what it means for an animal to have a split hoof. And we've seen this actually. When a person only has one side to his personality, the side that's natural for him, it's called kiyuma dechad samcha. He's standing on one foot. That's what it looks like. It might be because of his natural tendencies. But a kosher animal doesn't have just 1 foot. It's always standing on 2 feet. Even on the 1 foot, it has 2 feet. What does that mean? Because it's mafreset posa, because its hoof is split. So it's actually standing on two things at the same time. כשהיא מופרסת ששני הכיוונים לימין ולשמאל, אדם יוצא מטבעו ברגלו מבטא את שליחות האדם העליון בכל מטרה אליו הוא נשלח. So when you're able to stand on both feet at the same time, and here it's on every foot is split into 2. So this split like this, at both left. By the way, it's not so easy to stand on this hoof. I think that's why they don't run very fast. I don't know if that's true about an antelope. I think it also has a split hoof and it runs pretty fast.
That bull yesterday was running pretty fast.
Bulls also, yeah. It wasn't running so fast. You compare it to any horse. A horse would kick its tuchus. Anyway, why did you see that bull? Were you there? Were you in Lod yesterday and you met the bull?
That was in the video.
Okay. So the moment that you're able to stand on 2 feet, as it were, on 2 sides, both left and right, that is a sign of kosher. That is a sign of something that went beyond its nature. Again, in the animal, I don't think that the animal went beyond its nature, and I'm not so sure that it has a difficult time standing on this split hoof. Maybe I'm wrong. But in any case, we said that this is a mashal, this is a parable that within it contains the meaning. And the meaning is that above things that are kosher are those things that are inter-inclusive, that they include both sides. And why? Because now you have to ask, why is it that inter-inclusion is a godly trait? It says because the only way you can reach this is through godliness. The only way you can reach this is by going at something that's beyond the plurality. You have to go to something that's unifying above what you are. You have to go to the infinite, which is beyond the finite. You have to approach godliness. So if you have no connection to godliness, you can't come to this balance. So this balance is a sign that he's kosher. To both sides. And so therefore he is like the supernal man. The supernal man is like the image of godliness that's possible in a human. So it has to be all the way through. It can't just be that below it looks like it's split. It has to also be from the top of the hoof. It's also split. So it's really like 2 fingers. It's really a split hoof. So why is that? So what this means is that it shouldn't be just where you meet reality, the bottom side. The bottom side is, okay, so in doing things, I'm balanced. It has to also be above. What does it mean that it's above? That it's also internally. Because when you're looking at above and below in the animal, so you're saying the higher up I go, the more internal that is in man. Okay. In me, it's like there are different axes of looking at things. You can look at left and right, and you can look at up and down, and you can look at front and back. The Rebbe is using all three here. He's saying the left and right we already discussed. That means that you have a right side and a left side, and you've been able to traverse the entire axis, right? The whole horizontal axis. Why are you so comfortable in both sides? Because you're connected above. But he says that's also true in terms of up and down. So by the animal it means that the hoof is split all the way through, up and down. But in the human, this vertical axis translates into a axis that goes in. What does this mean? That through and through, it's what we call through and through. That in your pneumius also, in your inner aspect also, you are serving God. And therefore you can go as far in as you need. It's a very important thing to know. What does it mean that you can go as far in as you need? There's this thing that everybody has triggers, or you can push people's buttons, right? So there's a famous story about Hillel, that these two guys they took a wager if they could get Hillel to get angry. Now, what do you mean if you can get Hillel? You can get any person to get angry. Even Moshe Rabbeinu got angry. Of course, you can get him to get angry. What's the question? No, it's not so simple. Hillel is something different. If you say that Hillel's just chesed because God created him this way, so okay, so there's nothing there that indicates that you can get him angry. Maybe you can't get him. Maybe he's just that way, that he has nothing that you can make him angry. But the point is, you have to scratch below the surface. Getting him angry on the outside is not an issue. The question is whether he's agitated on the inside. So what did this guy do? He said, it's not going to be whether I get him angry or not. It's going to be the question of whether he can go back to doing what he was doing before. So that's why he bothered him Shabbos evening as he's washing himself, as he's cleaning his head. How long does it take to clean? Well, it doesn't take that long. How does it work? Well, you wet your head and you put shampoo in, right? So this guy, he looks and he waits exactly 10 seconds for Hillel to put to get the shampoo in his hands maybe, and he's not yet finished. And he calls out to him, and he thinks maybe he has, because he's a posek, so he thinks maybe he has a very urgent question. So he comes out, he puts a towel on himself, and he comes out, and his head is wet, and he's got the shampoo inside. And he asks him this stupid question. Okay, so he answers. He goes back in, he continues, and he waits 10 seconds, and he yells again. It doesn't take like a long time. It's like very, very quick. Why? Because the whole point was to get him agitated. He's in a state where, what would a person do if he sees that there's this nudnik who's driving him nuts? He's not going to have the presence of mind and the calmness to go back and just continue washing his hair like nothing happened. It's gonna drive him nuts. He's going to leave the and you have to remember, they didn't have showers then. He had to go into a special place where they did this. He's going to give up on the whole thing. But Hillel doesn't. Hillel has the same composure all the way through. So he's saying, what is this? Where does a person get something like that? That's because inside you can't get him angry. Because inside he has calmness. It's through and through. It's all the way through. Whatever he had on the outside, okay, that's the way God made him. But the fact that he can make this all the way through, all the way into the most inner recesses, you can't frivol him. You can't do anything to him. You can't shake his feathers. That's because he's worked on himself. So that's the inner dimension. Inner dimension means that psychologically, inside, I really don't get angry. And that's a translation from above and below in the animal to in and out in the human being. But this is in general. This is how we talk about it, because chitzonius and pnimius is a reflection of that vertical axis. As en kan halav itkalulut, if he's not like that, there's no inter-inclusion here. Drusha חצייה בפנימיות וגם בפועל, לכל העומק, ואז תוכלו נוצרת ההתקללות על ידי ובו תדבקון. And this is what allows a person to cling to God. Because the clinging to God is not just on the outside, it's not just the actions. We said that all the actions, אחרי השם אלוהיכם תלכון, that was the external side. You follow God by doing His mitzvos. But what that's supposed to lead to is a change on the inside. And the change on the inside is, how do you act when they're trying to trigger you? When the world is trying to, where do you go then? Are you calm and collected on the inside as well? Is it that means that you're clinging to God. To cling to God literally means that the person's psychology has changed. If it hasn't changed, he's not clinging to God. He's doing something. He's doing mitzvahs. But he hasn't changed his inner self, and that means that he's not clinging to God. That's what it means to cling to God. That's also what it means that you can't cling to God, so cling to Torah scholars. Why? Because what has the Torah scholar done? He's changed his mind. He had the mind of a regular human being. And now he's so ingrained in Torah that internally he thinks differently. He has what we call das Torah. His consciousness is just a different type of consciousness. Now you're shaking your head, am I like this or not?
No.
Why not? There are certainly things... there are certain things in which you've reached that. And if you haven't, then you know where you need to go. And these tests that we have in life, they're meant to help us question whether have I really reached an inner state of this inter-inclusion? Have I really reached this inner state where I can say with confidence that I'm clinging to God? And that's where it is. So again, what is external at the beginning, up and down, becomes an inner dimension of having it affect you more and more. And that's what we talked about yesterday, that I mentioned, if you remember, Shafi leSeifa dekra, that if you can bring yourself always to finish the paragraph, then you're shafel, then you have lowliness. It means you're standing in front of the Torah, or whatever you're doing, and saying, I am serving it, not it serving me. Okay.